Many thought Cris Cyborg was crazy for taking a fight on 3.5 weeks' notice against Yana Kunitskaya in the main event of UFC 222. Cyborg 20-1 NC silenced those people and showed why she's the greatest female fighter of all time, beating Kunitskaya by TKO at 3:25 of the first round to retain her women's featherweight title and extend her unbeaten streak to 21. "I took this fight, old shootbox style," Cyborg told Joe Rogan in her post-fight interview. 3 weeks notice. Anybody, anytime, anywhere. Early on in the fight, things got dicey when Cyborg landed a powerful right hand but Kunitskaya secured a single leg takedown. Kunitskaya 10-4 kept Cyborg down for a moment, but Kunitskaya was relentless and stayed on top of Cyborg and had her back against the cage in the clinch. Cyborg bounced right back and just connected on a series of right hands until she dropped Kunitskaya to the mat. Couple hammerfists later and the referee stepped in to put a halt to the action and continue her reign of terror. Rogan asked what could be next and help grow Cyborg's legacy as she really has no one to face at this point. Cyborg made it abundantly clear in wanting bantamweight champion Amanda Nunes, who recently challenged her. "Now I wait for Amanda Nunes," Cyborg told Rogan. "She called me out. When you call Cyborg out, you have to handle it." Nunes competed at 145 pounds for the first 7 fights of her career, so a move back up to that weight shouldn't be a problem for her. She's been working on adding more weight to make sure she's properly prepared to face Cyborg later this year. First though, Nunes has a rumored title defense against Raquel Pennington at UFC 224 on May 12. Will be interesting to see if the UFC doesn't make the fight and instead make Cyborg and Nunes for UFC 226 on July 7. All times are Eastern. UFC 222 results 11:20. Now it is time for the main event of UFC 222. For the Women's Featherweight Championship, Cris Cyborg defends her title against Yana Kunitskaya. The main event was made when men's featherweight title holder Max Holloway had to bow out against Frankie Edgar to Holloway suffering a leg injury. Cyborg just fought 63 days ago, defeating Holly Holm at UFC 219. Kunitskaya, the former Invicta FC bantamweight champion, hasn't fought since winning the title against Raquel Pennington in August. Cyborg and Kunitskaya have a common opponent in Tonya Evinger. Cyborg blasted through Evinger at UFC 214 to become the champion, while Kunitskaya lost to her by second-round submission in March. Will the quick turnaround be too much for Cyborg? Can Kunitskaya spring the upset? We are about to find out. Brian Ortega knocks out Frankie Edgar to become #1 contender for featherweight title. 12-13 Ortega def. Edgar by knockout at 4:44 of the first round. Ortega told Sporting News he would be the one to stop Edgar, and he did just that. Edgar was controlling the majority of the round until Ortega found his groove with about 90 seconds left in the round. The end came when Ortega connected on a vicious elbow which staggered Edgar. Smelling trouble, Ortega landed a knee, a left hand and uppercut for the ages to become the first man to ever stop Edgar. There's a new #1 contender for the featherweight championship.
Really excited to see Holloway versus Ortega later on this year. Unbelievable.
2-ranked Frankie Edgar takes on #3-ranked Brian Ortega. Since a title loss to Jose Aldo, Edgar, who was supposed to face champion Max Holloway in the main event of this show, has won back-to-back fights. Ortega, unbeaten in 14 fights, is coming off a second-round submission victory over Cub Swanson in December, replaced Holloway. This fight is the old lion versus the young lion. Really looking forward seeing this in what has been dubbed by MMA pundits as the fight of the night. Sean O'Malley turns in gusty performance in win over Andre Sokamthath 11:49. O'Malley def. Sokamthath by unanimous decision 29-27, 29-27, 29-28. What a gutsy performance by O'Malley in the third round. He threw a head kick which hit Sokamthath in the elbow and appeared to break his foot. He kept trying to get up to his feet. Somehow he did by connecting on a right hand and a spinning back fist. And when the fight was on the ground, O'Malley was trying for submission. Then, in something I have never seen, Joe Rogan interview O'Malley while he was in tremendous pain, a star was born tonight. Such an heart and desire which you don't see in young fighters. Most would have quit and called it a day. Not this kid. Like he told Rogan, "Welcome to the sugar show."
A recap of that post-fight interview down arrow.
Connected on a beautiful spinning back fist head kick combination near the end of the first round. Didn't like seeing Kamthath stumbling and not knowing where he was going at the end of the first round. 11:29. Coming up next at UFC 222, in bantamweight action, Sean O'Malley faces Andre Kamthath. O'Malley is undefeated in 9 fights and made a name for himself on Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender show, notching a highlight reel over Alfred Kashakian. Kamthath's lost 2 of his last 3 but is coming off a victory in his last fight over Luke Sanders by second round TKO at UFC Fight Night 123. The UFC is very high on O'Malley. Can have all the hype you want but he has to deliver. Andrei Arlovski goes to new trick, beats Stefan Struve 11:25, Arlovski def. Struve by unanimous decision, 30-27, 29-28, 29-28. Amazing to see Arlovski keep on making adjustments considering he made his octagon debut at UFC 28 in November 2000. Never seen Arlovski secure so many takedowns in one fight. Shows how much he still loves the game. He told Joe Rogan in his post-fight interview that he wants to make another run to once again become the heavyweight champion. Would love to see Struve switch training camps and learn to just use the jab and let everything come after that. No reason Struve can be a top contender. He beat current heavyweight champion. Change in training would do him good. The win for Arlovski now ties him with Frank Mir for most wins in the heavyweight division at 16. Now tied for the most wins in UFC HW history.
The Pitbull, at Andrei Arlovski.
Have to be consistent. 11:10. Struve given a hard warning by Herb Dean in the latter half of the second round for an eye poke. Like what Struve said to Dean, though, about not giving Arlovski a warning about grabbing the top of the cage when Struve tried to take him down. Looks like even fight heading into the final round. 11:04. Mind-boggling to see someone as tall and with the reach of Struve that he doesn't utilize the jab whatsoever. He could win every fight using it. Yet, he is content throwing kicks and getting taken down by Arlovski. 10:54. Up next at UFC 222, in heavyweight action, No. 10 ranked Stefan Struve goes up against former UFC heavyweight champion and No. 12 ranked Andrei Arlovski. Even though he's lost his last fight against surging contender Alexander Volkov at UFC Fight Night 115 in September, Struve finally appears to getting into groove, winning of 2 of his last 3. Arlovski got back into the winner's circle, beating Junior Albini to snap a 5-fight losing streak. A must-win for Arlovski to keep his job, and for Struve, this is the biggest fight of his career. Don't go to the bathroom. You will miss a knockout. 10:48. Really like the video game simulation of UFC 223 main event fight for the lightweight title as champion Tony Ferguson finally faces Khabib Nurmagomedov. Is it April 7th yet? Ketlin Vieira outgrapples Kat Zingano to remain undefeated. 10:45. Vieira def. Zingano by split decision, 28-29, 29-28, 29-28. What is going on with these judges tonight? Good first round for Vieira. Her striking has improved drastically while Zingano kept her head up, hands down every time she threw a kick, and Vieira made her pay for it. The strikes helped set up a takedown to secure the round. The second round began and Zingano went right at Vieira, who secured a beautiful takedown. Zingano had no answer to getting up. Every time she got Vieira back to her feet, Vieira would find a way to get back to the ground and maintain position. Zingano started the third round aggressively with a head kick and a flush right hand. Vieira checked a Zingano kick and something with Zingano's leg gave out. Vieira seized the opportunity to get a takedown. Disappointed, Vieira didn't try to take advantage of Zingano's injury when she had the chance, as somehow Zingano popped up to land 2 flush knees. Zingano let it all hang out in the final 40 seconds, throwing everything but the kitchen sink, but it didn't prove to be enough. Interesting to see Joe Rogan mention a Bellator fighter on the show, as he mentioned former lightweight champion Michael Chandler when comparing what happened to Zingano earlier in the third. I don't know what the judges are looking at it. The fight wasn't even close. Vieira dominated 14 of the 15 minutes of the fight. Zingano didn't do much at all. Shows you can't fight once every 20 months and expect to win. Have to be active, especially in a deep division like the women's bantamweights. Vieira's now 10-0 and looks to be one fight away from fighting for the title currently held by fellow Brazilian Amanda Nunes. 10-16, kicking off the main card of UFC 222 in women's bantamweight action. A former title challenger and number 6 ranked Cat Zingano battles number 5 ranked Ketlen Vieira. Zingano returns after a 603-day layoff, losing to Juliana Pena at UFC 200 in July 2016. Vieira has quickly risen through the ranks in the division, going undefeated in 9 career fights with 3 of those in the UFC. Great way to begin the pay-per-view. 10:01, beautiful tribute by the UFC to Bruce Connell to kick off the pay-per-view. Connell was the lead producer for the UFC for over 2 decades, starting at UFC 17, passed away yesterday. Hard to see Joe Rogan cry, which shows how much he meant to the UFC broadcasts. OMG, just learned of passing of Bruce Connell, a super guy. TV business. Yoda by split decision, 28-29, 29-28, 29-28. Once again Adelaide Bird with her head scratching. Dern clearly won the first and third while Yoda captured the second. Dern showed she has some ways to go but was impressed by her striking and willing to keep it on the fight. Dern finally secured a takedown with 1:45 left to bring him the victory. The UFC needs to let Dern grow slowly and feed her good opposition, but not against world beaters. If they do, she could be a star. Now that she is in the UFC, hopefully UFC takes it slow with Dern. No need to rush. Matchmaking will be key in her progression. She's only 6-0 and has been doing this for less than 2 years, so no need to get crazy. Ariel Helwani at Ariel Helwani, March 4, 2018, 9:30, in the featured preliminary bout at UFC 222 in women's strawweight action. Mackenzie Dern makes her highly anticipated debut when she squares off with Ashley Yoder. Dern is the premier female Jiu-Jitsu practitioner in the world and is undefeated in 5 career fights. Yoda comes in on a 2-fight losing skid. Can Dern live up the hype? Or has Yoda derailed the train? 9:15, Hernandez def. Dariush by knockout at 0:42 of the first round. What an upset. Hernandez had a great game plan. He started out fast and Dariush couldn't recover. A beautiful straight left hand sent Dariush's knee buckling and it was all over. Couldn't ask for a better UFC debut. Interested to see how the UFC brings him along now since he beat a ranked opponent.
That's 7 straight wins for the native of Texas. Welcome to the big show, Alexander Hernandez.
12-ranked Beneil Dariush faces off against Alexander Hernandez. Dariush is coming off a great fight in a draw against Evan Dunham at UFC 216 back in October. Hernandez steps in on 8 days' notice, replacing Bobby Green is making his UFC debut. He earned the opportunity, winning 6 consecutive fights. This is a win-win situation for Hernandez. He made weight and is fighting in the UFC. It's a lose-lose for Dariush. He wins, it's expected. Has to win and do it impressively. 8:58, Dodson def. Munhoz by split decision, 28-29, 30-27, 29-28. Fight came down to the third round as Dodson had won the first and Munhoz the second. The former winner of The Ultimate Fighter controlled the third round using his speed, lateral movement and straight left hand. Once again Adelaide Bird putting in a horrific card, giving Dodson the second round when he obviously lost the round. Great win for Dodson. His next fight though is make or break. Can't keep trading wins. Have to become more consistent if he wants to get into the title picture at 135 pounds. 8:34, up next at UFC 222, in bantamweight action, number 8 ranked John Dodson battles number 10 ranked Pedro Munhoz. This fight was originally scheduled for UFC Fight Night 125 at the beginning of February. But Munhoz missed weight by an inexcusable 4 pounds. Dodson refused to fight him and the bout got pulled and rescheduled for this card. A great fight between two guys ranked inside the top 10. Dodson's gone 2-2 since his return to 135 pounds. Munhoz is on a good run, winning 4 consecutive bouts. Let's hope we don't get a repeat of the last fight. A $20 weight def. Lombard by disqualification. At the end of the round, Dolway threw a body kick which Lombard caught it. The bell sounded and Lombard still connected on a right hand and straight left hand which sent Dolway packing to the canvas. The right call was made the officials. No reason for Lombard to do that when the bell already sounded. Dolway had no idea where he was at and you could see him continuously saying, "What happened?" just a tad after the bell by Hector Lombard. 8:05. The UFC 222 preliminary card continues. In middleweight action, CB Dolway battles Hector Lombard. In his last fight, Dolway snapped a 3-fight losing streak, defeating Ed Herman at the Ultimate Fighter 25 finale in July. Lombard is in desperate need of a win, losing 4 in a row. Lombard is a guy who starts quick and fades down the stretch. If Dolway can weather the early storm, it's his to win. 7:49. Otto def. Pile by TKO at 2:34 of the first round. Was a slugfest to begin the fight as Pile and Otto were trading heavy leather. With his back against the cage, Otto blasted Pile with a vicious right hand. A couple ground and pound punches later and it was all she wrote. Great way for Otto to get back on track and a disappointing way for Pile to end his career. Pile was a former WEC welterweight champion, ends his career going 2-7-1-3-1, 7:40, closing out the prelims on UFC Fight Pass. In welterweight action, Mike Pyle takes on Zach Otto. Pyle announced before the fight this will be the final bout of his career. Otto's lost 2 of his last 3 fights. Expect Pyle to put it all on the line and leave everything he has in the octagon. 7:35, Stamann def. Caraway by split decision, 28-29, 29-28, 29-28. A close fight. Caraway won the first, Stamann won the second and the third was really close. Stamann controlled the first half of the final round and Caraway poured it on in the final half. Thought Caraway did more significant damage in his dominance. Stamann's a very impressive 17-1 and should now be in the UFC rankings. 7:23. Salaries for UFC 222. Pretty disturbing. Arlovski is getting paid more than 3 of the 4 fighters in the key 2 fights. This is way pay needs to be better across the board so things like this don't keep happening. No reason why Cyborg shouldn't be making $1 million and Kunitskaya should be at $500,000. UFC 222 salary info. Cyborg $500,000 show, $0 win, same as UFC 219. Yana $100,000 per $0. Frankie $195,000 per $0. Ortega $100,000 per $100,000. Brett Okamoto at Bokamoto's PN. March 3, 2018. Other notable UFC 222 salaries. Sean O'Malley $22,000 per $22,000. Andre Sokamthath $19,000 per $19,000. Zingano $35,000 per $35,000. Arlovski $275,000 per $0. Mackenzie Dern $25,000 per $25,000. Dodson $41,000 per $41,000. Lombard $62,000 per $62,000. Brett Okamoto at Bokamoto's PN. March 4, 2018. 7:10. Coming up next at UFC 222. In bantamweight action, No. 7 ranked Brian Caraway faces Cody Stamann. Caraway's won 4 of his last 5 fights but hasn't competed since his win over Aljamain Sterling at UFC Fight Night 88 due to an undisclosed injury and unknown reasons. Stamann's on it, winning 9 consecutive fights including his first 2 fights in the UFC. This is where I have a problem with UFC rankings. How could a guy still be ranked after only have 1 fight in the last 32 months? Interesting to see how the long hiatus affects Caraway since he hasn't been active while Stamann's been fighting. 7 o'clock, Johnson garners the split decision victory over Milstead 27-30, 29-28, 29-28. Would love to know which judge gave Milstead a round. can see where a round would be given for him, but all 3 rounds. A horrid scorecard. Hopefully, that person will not be scoring the rest of the card. The name of the game for Johnson was his wrestling and landed more shots than Milstead. Johnson remains undefeated in 9 contests. 6:38, kicking off UFC 222 on UFC Fight Pass. In light heavyweight action, Adam Milstead takes on Jordan Johnson. Milstead is making his debut at 205 pounds after a 1-year layoff due to a torn ACL. Johnson comes in undefeated in 8 fights, including his first 2 inside the octagon. Johnson has a 100 perfect takedown defense rate. Great way to kick off what should be a great night of action. 6:15, in about 15 minutes, UFC 222 will begin. Let's take a look back at Cyborg's last fight at UFC 219 against Holly Holm. 4:30, we are inching closer to fight time.
RTBC, it's fight day.
In a few hours, UFC 222 will commence from the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas, featuring a women's featherweight title fight between champion Cris Cyborg and Yana Kunitskaya. Stay locked into SN all day long for news on UFC 222 as we approach bell time of 6:30. UFC 222 fight card. Main card: Cris Cyborg C vs. Yana Kunitskaya for the UFC Women's Featherweight title. Frankie Edgar vs. Brian Ortega. Featherweights: Sean O'Malley vs. Andre Sokamthath. Bantamweights: Stefan Struve vs. Andrei Arlovsky. Heavyweights: Kat Zingano vs. Ketlin Vieira. Women's bantamweights preliminary card: Ashley Yoder vs. Mackenzie Dern. Women's strawweights: Beneil Dariush vs. Alexander Hernandez. Lightweights: John Dodson vs. Pedro Munhoz. Bantamweights: C.B. Dollaway vs. Hector Lombard. Middleweights: Mike Pyle vs. Zach Otto. Welterweights: Brian Caraway vs. Cody Stamann. Bantamweights: Jordan Johnson vs. Adam Milstead. Light heavyweights: UFC 222 latest news. Think headliner Yana Kunitskaya cares about being the underdog. She gives a message to them. A lot is on the line at UFC 222. We break down what's at stake in the key fights. Don't know much about UFC 222? Here's everything you need to know. Who will emerge victorious at UFC 222? SN's MMA experts give the picks. Brian Ortega admits to SN he's surprised at his sudden rise in the featherweight division. Is Frankie Edgar an all-time great in the UFC? We rank where he's at. Mackenzie Dern makes her highly anticipated debut at UFC 222. We explore why patience will be the key to her success. Stephen Muehlhausen is an MMA and boxing writer and contributor for Sporting News. You can listen to his podcast, The Fight Junkies, here. You can email him at stevemuehlhausen@yahoo.com and can find him on Twitter at smulhausenma.